I have always believed that libraries are magical places. In my city, there is an ancient library, one that seems to be pulled straight from a horror movie. It has that dusty air, those dark hallways, and the creaking shelves weighted down by countless books. It was in that place that I became a librarian. My life revolved around the thousands of stories contained within those pages. But I never imagined that some of those tales could become too real, to the point of transforming into unsettling predictions. It all started one ordinary night when a violent storm caused a power outage. I found myself in the basement, in the old books section, going through some volumes that had sat in darkness for decades. It was then that I heard a whisper. I thought it was just my nerves acting up after a long day of work, but as I approached one of the shelves, I noticed a book moving slightly, as if an invisible wind was nudging it. Intrigued, I opened it and saw that the pages were filled with words I had never read before. It was as if they were rewriting themselves. That night, while the storm raged outside, I couldn't tear my eyes away from that book. The words danced before me, forming tales of deaths, tragedies I never imagined possible, stories of people I knew, of neighbors who lived just a few doors down, whose fates seemed sealed within those pages. At first, I thought it was just a trick of my tired mind, but as the hours passed and the invisible typewriter continued its work, the atmosphere around me grew heavier, more ominous. I began to recall the names of those who died in the stories and realized that those names were the same ones appearing in my everyday life. My heart raced and a chill ran down my spine. What would happen if those stories became reality? Panic took hold of me, but at the same time, an insatiable curiosity pushed me to keep reading. Each page was a revelation, a glimpse into a future that seemed inevitable. Who was the author of these narratives? How was it possible that they knew such intimate details of our lives? Days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about those books. I felt that the librarian in me was transforming into some sort of oracle. Every time I entered the basement, I hoped to find new stories, new announced deaths. Each time one of my neighbors disappeared or suffered a tragedy, I remembered the words I had read. The constant tension gripped my mind, like a shadow I couldn't shake off. The library, which had once been my refuge, became a place of terror. My co-workers began to notice that something was wrong. They watched me with concern as I recounted stories of what I had discovered. Some laughed, thinking I was exaggerating, but others looked at me with a degree of fear that unsettled me. The night grew darker every time I turned on the lights in the basement. The librarian in the basement was becoming a character in her own story. A week later, while reviewing the old books, I stumbled upon one that seemed different. Its cover was worn, and the title was barely legible. The Shadows That Walk, it said, and I felt a shiver upon opening it. The first page was already written. I dread to admit that it was one of the stories I had read before, a tale about the death of a woman named Emily, whom I had seen in the corner cafe just days earlier. According to the words now unfolding before me, Emily would die in a traffic accident that very night. My mind filled with dark images, and a part of me knew that I had to do something. Somehow, I had to prevent that from happening. I gathered my courage and set out to find Emily. The air was thick, and the atmosphere was laden with a sense of doom. I ran to the cafe, trying to remember her face. Upon arrival, I saw her seated at one of the tables, unaware of the impending storm. I approached her, attempting to articulate some warning about what I had read. However, the words stuck in my throat as if an invisible force prevented me from speaking. I could only muster a series of incoherent phrases before she smiled softly, believing it was a bad joke. Before I could react, Emily said her goodbyes and gestured towards the door, suggesting that I stop dramatizing. Her smile faded as she crossed the street. It was a moment, a whisper of fate. A bright light approached at high speed, and the sound of a horn echoed in my ears. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The impact was brutal, and time seemed to stand still. I cried silently as reality crumbled around me. The horror of what I had read became real. The story I had believed I could change had come true. I rushed back to the library, the pulse in my temples resonating like a drum, trying to find solace among the books that had foretold this tragedy. But my refuge had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers that did not cease. The pages of the book about Emily rewrote themselves again, and now the names of my co-workers began to appear in the following stories. Desperate, I decided that I could not stay there. I had to uncover the truth behind that cursed library. I immersed myself in the books, seeking answers. I spent countless nights researching the history of the building, its former owners, and the legends that often lingered around it. I spoke with the town's elders, who whispered tales of a librarian who had made a dark pact with supernatural forces. They told me about books that should never have been read, stories that fed on human suffering and that, once revealed, came to life. I began to connect the dots, understanding that I was not just the librarian of the basement. I was a guardian of secrets that should have remained hidden. Upon discovering more about those dark gifts, I realized that the only way to break the curse was to confront the entity that had taken possession of the books. I had to return to the basement and face the shadow that had rewritten the stories. So one night, armed with a flashlight and the determination to free myself from that burden, I returned to where it all began. The library was silent. The shelves seemed to watch me with disdain. Yet, I knew I had to move forward. I made my way to the spot where I had first found those cursed books. With each step, the tension built, as if the shadows wanted to ensnare me. As I opened book after book, what had started as a game of words transformed into a ritual of confrontation. As I recited fragments of the death stories, a cold current swept over my body, and the atmosphere grew more oppressive. I felt an engulfing presence, something ancient watching me. With what little courage I had left, I proclaimed that I no longer feared their tales, that the stories would no longer dictate the fate of those I loved. In that instant, a laughter echoed among the shelves. It was a chilling sound that reverberated in my ears. "Do you really think you can escape this?" said the voice. "The shadows will always find you." But with every word I uttered, I felt the atmosphere beginning to change. The presence weakened before my determination. I could sense the pages crumbling, the tales losing their power. And so, when I finally closed the last book, the room erupted in a whirlwind of light and shadow. I felt a release, as if the souls trapped between the pages could finally rest. In a blink, everything calmed, as if the air cleared of a dark omen. I had passed the test. I had faced the monster residing in my own library. However, the price I paid was high. I knew that even though I had freed some, the library would always harbor secrets. As a warning, still, now I could return to my life, to my home, and to my friends, without the specter of death lurking behind every corner. So when I closed the basement door for the last time, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. I knew I would never be the same again, but I was ready to face whatever came next. This story, my friends, serves as a reminder that sometimes the secrets held by shadows can be darker than we imagine. I hope you enjoyed this tale. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, a comment about what you thought, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories that will send shivers down your spine. Until next time,